Imagine a country smaller than Wales, El Salvador, once the most murderous place on earth. No invading armies, just neighbors, teenagers, and strangers as threats. Violence was so routine, it faded into the background. Headlines told of daily shootouts and dismembered bodies. In 2015, El Salvador's homicide rate was over 100 per 100,000 people. Global average is 6. Gangs like MS-13 and Barrio 18 ruled entire neighborhoods, extorting, recruiting, and killing at will. Invisible borders meant crossing the wrong street could be fatal. Fear was constant. The system was organized, not random. Bus drivers paid daily extortion just to work. Shop owners handed over earnings to survive. Families were shattered, youths forced into gangs, women abused. The state was powerless or complicit. Police were outgunned and corrupt. For decades, El Salvador seemed abandoned to chaos, a failed state. How did it come to this? The answer lies in a tangled web of politics, war, and foreign intervention. To understand today's El Salvador, we must look back to the seeds of violence sown in a bloody conflict. The roots of the gangs run deep into the country's painful past. This is not just a story of crime, but of a nation shaped by forces far beyond its borders. The transformation of El Salvador is dramatic and controversial. To see how it happened, we need to start at the beginning. Let's go back to where it all began. In the late 1970s, El Salvador was ruled by a military-backed regime serving a wealthy elite. The poor, campesinos, had no land, no power, and no voice. Demands for rights were met with brutal repression. Death squads silenced dissent. Into this climate stepped Oscar Romero, a conservative priest appointed archbishop in 1977. The elite expected him to maintain the status quo. But the murder of his friend, priest Rutilio Grande, changed everything. Romero realized neutrality was impossible. He began using his pulpit to denounce violence and name victims. His radio sermons became a beacon of hope for the oppressed. He called out torturers and pleaded with soldiers to stop the repression. "In the name of God, I order you, stop the repression," he declared. Romero's moral authority threatened the regime. The quiet priest became their most dangerous enemy. His voice gave hope to the voiceless and made him a target. The government could not tolerate his defiance. Romero's stand would change the course of Salvadoran history, but it would come at a terrible cost. On March 24, 1980, Archbishop Romero was assassinated while celebrating Mass. His death sent shockwaves through the nation. The message: no one was safe, not even the church. Instead of silencing dissent, the killing ignited a civil war. At Romero's funeral, bombs exploded and snipers fired on mourners. Dozens died. Peaceful protest was now impossible. The leftist FMLN took up arms. The war lasted 12 years, with no clear front lines. Violence was everywhere. US-backed government forces fought Soviet and Cuban-supported rebels. Death squads kidnapped, tortured, and executed suspected sympathizers. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. Entire villages were massacred. The US poured billions into the Salvadoran military, prolonging the conflict. The infamous Atlacatl Battalion, US-trained, committed atrocities like El Mozote. The war became a Cold War proxy, flooding El Salvador with weapons and money. The people paid the price in blood. The conflict left the country shattered, traumatized, and deeply divided. The seeds of future violence were sown in this brutal era. El Salvador became a pawn in a global struggle, its people left to pick up the pieces. The Civil War left 75,000 dead, thousands missing, and the country in ruins. A generation grew up amid trauma. Schools closed, families torn apart. Many fled north to the US, seeking safety. In Los Angeles, Salvadoran youth faced poverty and gang violence. To survive, they formed their own gangs, MS-13 and Barrio 18. These groups became surrogate families, adopting the codes and brutality of American street gangs. The monster was born, forged in war, exile, and desperation. These were not just statistics, but scared kids trying to survive. The gang's roots were in trauma and displacement. What began as protection soon turned into organized crime. The consequences would haunt El Salvador for decades. The cycle of violence was just beginning. Ironically, the gangs that terrorized El Salvador were born in the US. In the 1990s, the US deported thousands of Salvadoran gang members back home. They returned to a country devastated by war, with weak institutions and plenty of weapons. These deportees, hardened by American prisons, quickly dominated local crime. They recruited disillusioned youth, offering power and belonging. MS-13 and Barrio 18 carved up the country, enforcing brutal control. Extortion became their main income. Everyone paid or risked death. The gangs became a shadow government, feeding on fear. By the 2010s, El Salvador was the world's most violent country not at war. In 2015, there were over 6,600 homicides, an average of 18 per day. The Maras held 6 million people hostage. The government seemed powerless to stop them. Daily life was ruled by terror and invisible borders. El Salvador was, by all accounts, a failed state. The need for change was desperate. Enter Nayib Bukele, a young social media-savvy outsider. In 2019, he won the presidency, promising to crush the gangs. Bukele's approach, overwhelming force. He flooded gang strongholds with soldiers and police. In 2020, he marched troops into the legislature to push his security plan. Critics called it authoritarian. Bukele shrugged off the label. In March 2022, after a surge in killings, he declared a state of emergency. Constitutional rights were suspended. Mass arrests began. Over 70,000 people were detained, more than 1% of the population. A massive new prison was built to house them. Images of tattooed prisoners, heads shaved, packed together, sent a clear message. The state was back in control. Bukele's crackdown stunned the world. Supporters cheered the return of order. Critics warned of human rights abuses. The old fear of gangs was replaced by a new fear of the state. El Salvador had changed overnight. Bukele didn't stop at security. He made Bitcoin legal tender in 2021. He claimed it would help the unbanked, attract investment, and modernize the economy. The government bought Bitcoin, launched a digital wallet, and gave citizens a $30 bonus. Crypto enthusiasts flocked to Bitcoin Beach, and plans for a futuristic Bitcoin city were announced. But the gamble drew criticism from economists and the IMF. Bitcoin's value crashed, wiping millions from the treasury. Most Salvadorans stuck with the US dollar, finding Bitcoin confusing and unstable. The results are mixed. Violence has plummeted, daily life is safer, and Bukele's approval is sky high. Businesses no longer pay extortion. People walk the streets without fear. Homicide rates have dropped by over 90%. For the first time in a generation, Salvadorans feel peace. But the cost is high. Civil liberties have eroded. The Bitcoin experiment remains risky and uncertain. Bukele's vision is bold, but the future is unclear. El Salvador is a nation transformed, but at what price? Amid the gang crackdown, another war rages against women. El Salvador's culture of machismo fuels shocking rates of violence and femicide. The country has a total abortion ban, no exceptions, even for rape or danger to the mother. Women suffering miscarriages can be jailed for decades, accused of homicide. Poor rural women are most at risk, often denied healthcare and legal support. Activists say the law creates fear, keeping women from seeking help. Bukele, despite his modern image, refuses to reform these laws. For women's rights advocates, this is a bitter contradiction. The new peace is real, but justice and equality for women remain distant. El Salvador's transformation leaves half its population behind. True safety means more than just ending gang violence. Today, El Salvador is transformed. Streets once ruled by gangs are now safe. Many see Bukele as a savior, willing to pay the price for peace. But that price is steep mass incarceration, suspended rights, and reports of torture and deaths in custody. Human rights groups warn of innocent lives ruined and democracy eroded. The fear of gangs has been replaced by fear of the state. Can peace built on mass arrests and lost freedoms last? What happens when the emergency ends or if the economy falters? The wounds of war, gang violence, and injustice run deep. El Salvador's story is a warning. Desperate people will trade freedom for security. The country has stepped back from the abyss, but its journey is far from over. The world watches to see if this fragile peace will hold. The final cost of El Salvador's transformation is still unknown. The future hangs in the balance.